So I'm going to talk about 8 rules of engagement. And why are there 8 of them? Because we're in China. So we're going to do 8 rules. And the rules of engagement are really the framework that Martin talked about in his talk. It's how do you get people to engage with what you've built? And it also addresses some of the issues that Nicholas talked about in his talk about build it and they will come is not the right attitude. People are not just going to come. You have to design your service to engage people, and that's going to be really important. So this is the Technology for Design seminar. I'm going to be talking about the design of technology to get people to engage with it. And before I do, can I have one person raise their hand, please? Just one person. Raise your hand. You back there, could you, yep. What's your name? Hi, Catherine. You're in charge of asking the first question after I'm finished talking, so please just listen really carefully. We're going to avoid the problem that happened in the last talk, and I'm going to remember you. Okay, so let's start with why do we need rules for engagement? This is sort of what Nicholas talked about, but we really need rules for engagement because we're not allowed to do this. If we could do this, everything would be pretty simple. We just hook people up to this machine and keep their eyes open and they just engage with our service, and that would be great. But at least in Hong Kong, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that in the US either. And this is a screen from WordPress, and this is really what happens when you just give people the tools and say, look at this, here's the tool, go create content on it. That's really, really difficult. And so if you look at Tumblr or Kickstarter, nothing looks like this anymore. We've come a long way from this, and the way to come a long way from this is to utilize some of the rules that I'm going to talk about. And these are really all derived from my own experiences with services and also some of the things that I've noticed successful services doing in the past to create engagement. So let's talk about the first rule, which is don't be shy, but do be clear, right? So I subscribed to the Obama campaign's mailing list, and I got probably 2 or 3 emails every day from them, and it got pretty annoying, but they did one thing right. They weren't shy, and they were very clear about what they wanted. So this is an email that they sent me, and it said, please register to vote. So very clear call to action. They weren't shy about it, and they just kept sending me emails. So, okay, I registered to vote. Cool, they send me a new email, now donate $5. I donate $5, I get a new email, now donate $10. Not shy about this at all, but this is how elections are won, right? And this is also how services are built. If you want people to do things, you have to ask them to do it, and you'd be surprised at how many people design services, but then that service never asks you to do anything, never gives you a clear call to action. So if you're going to be designing a service, don't be bashful about it, okay? You really have to ask people to do things. And when you ask people to do things, sometimes you need a little bit of help. And I call that leveraging the need to complete. So this was a term that was coined by a friend of mine, Dr. Hugo Liu out of MIT, who's also one of the co-founders of Hunch. But it turns out that our bodies release massive quantities of endorphins when we complete a complex task. And then through classical conditioning, we come to associate the process of completing something with the act of completing it. And so we get endorphins just by making progress on completing a task. We don't even have to complete the whole task. We can just make a little bit of progress on it, and that's going to make us feel really good. So if you remember this from LinkedIn, when you sign up for LinkedIn, they give you this little progress bar, right? And they give you tips for how to make progress on it. Oh, all I have to do is enter in my name, I have to enter in my last job, a description, so on and so forth. It's all these little things that add up to completion, but each of those make us feel good, and they leverage our brain's chemistry to get us to do this thing that's so valuable for LinkedIn that we might not want to do otherwise. So that's pretty important. The other thing that we can do as designers of services is offer a suggestion, and this is Borat. And one of the things you'll notice if you watch any Sacha Baron Cohen video is that if you ask the right questions, you can get almost any answer that you want, and that's what makes his humor really appealing. So you have to offer people the right suggestions, the right prompts to get them to create content, or specifically the kind of content that you want them to create. So if you look at Tumblr, one thing about Tumblr's design that's never ever changed is this. This is the top of your Tumblr dashboard, and they give you these 7 prompts. Now, a lot of people think that this is sort of shortcut buttons. It makes it easy to post on Tumblr. Well, it does make it easy to post, but not because it takes time out of it. It's because it takes mental effort out of it. When you think about that WordPress box, it's just a blank space. You could post whatever you want. What these little previews do is they show you the types of things that you could post. You could post a song, or you could post text, or you could post a photo. And these are essentially giving you ideas of things that you can do, and it really allows people to create content much more easily to have this. The other thing that you want to do when you create a service is you want to make it easy for people to get pet, because just like Lassie, we like to get pet, and you need to build that into a service. And this is really about users relating to one another. And a good example of this is Yelp. At the bottom of every Yelp review, they give you these little buttons where you can say this is cool, or this is funny, or this is useful. And that's giving positive feedback to the person who created that content. It makes them feel good, and it makes them want to go back and create more and more of that content. So make it easy for people to give affection. You're going to get a lot more content created. The other thing that you want to do is you want to unlock ego. You essentially want to give people a way to feel like they're a king or they're a queen. And how do you do this? Well, you do it through instituting what's called ego metrics. What's an ego metric? Well, your follower count on Twitter is an ego metric, and what Justin Bieber's follower count tells me is that he's really, really important, right? And he thinks that he's really important too, because he sees this number going up all the time, and he sees it going up a lot when he tweets certain things, and he sees it going up a little when he tweets other things, and maybe he sees it go down when he tweets other things. But this is sort of a metric that he can judge his performance against. How many people care about what he's saying? And the more people that care about what he's saying, the more that he's going to contribute into that system, right? Because nobody wants to talk to an empty room. So I'm giving a much better speech to you than I would if there were only 5 people in this room. So you can feel lucky about that. The other thing you want to do is you want to give away candy. And this is not just explicitly you do this, you get this, but you sort of want to do it randomly. You want to make it a surprise and a treat and a little bit of a delight. And I think Foursquare does a really good example of that through badges, right? So you complete behaviors in the real world, you go to a bunch of restaurants, or you go to a movie theater, or you go to a new country, and Foursquare says, congratulations, you just earned the hot tamale badge for eating at 10 different Mexican restaurants. And it feels sort of random. You're like, hey, that's awesome, somebody just gave me a badge. And at the end of the day, it's a little bit cheesy, but guess what? Badges have been working for about 100 years. They worked in the Boy Scouts, they worked in Foursquare, and they're going to continue to work, but sometimes we have to come up with new twists on that, new ways of doing it. So it's going to continue to innovate, and this will have a different interpretation in the next service that comes out that's successful. But giving away what I call candy bars is essentially this, and it's a great way to generate engagement. The other thing that you want to do is you want to structure your service in such a way that it's an if this, then that behavior. And there's actually an entire service called If This, Then That, and it's abbreviated IFTTT. But this is, again, a Foursquare example, but Foursquare's created this great connection where if you go to a venue, it triggers a decision about whether you use the service. And that makes things a lot simpler, right? Because if I can use the service at any time, that essentially means there's no right time for me to use it. They've structured their service in such a way that there's very particular moments when I know that I have to make a decision about whether to use it or not, and in aggregate, that raises the amount of times that people are going to engage with your product, right? So this is how they do it in Foursquare. They just show you the places that are around you, and you say, oh, I'm at the Hong Kong Convention Center. That's a new place that I haven't been before, so I'm going to use the service now. In Instagram, it's, oh, I'm drinking another latte, I better take a photo of it. The final rule, the 8th rule, is that you need to leave room for expression. Of course, you don't want to overdo it. This is a screenshot from mid-90s era GeoCities where they gave people a little bit too much room for expression. You probably want to constrain it a little bit. Think more Facebook and less this, or even MySpace, I think, got a little overboard on this. But give people something that they can feel ownership over. And Tumblr does a great job of this through their theme galleries, right? So these are good-looking themes. They don't give you completely full reign, although you can go into the code and edit it yourself. But for most people, being able to choose from even 2 or 3 or a couple dozen themes is more than enough expression that they need, and it lets them feel ownership over the product that they're building. And at the end of the day, the reason that Kickstarter and all these other collaborative funding platforms are powerful is not just because they allow you to raise money, but they allow people to really intimately engage with your brand or with your product in a way that isn't going to happen in just a regular store. And there's some downsides to that, so you can end up getting a lot of emails that you have to manage. But the good thing about it is that you really can build evangelists or people who are super fans of your service or the things that you do by allowing them a little bit of control over it, engagement with it, and so on. So here are the 8 rules. Don't be shy, leverage the need to complete, offer suggestion, make it easy to show affection, unlock ego, give away candy, if this, then that, and leave room for expression. So when I was building my own company, Wander, we took all these rules and we incorporated them into sort of the first micro product that we built. And so I want to give you a little bit of a case study from Wander and really show you how you can leverage these tools in practice to build something that people are really going to engage with. So the first thing that we did was we gave people prompts. So instead of just giving them a blank screen, we gave them this sort of fill-in-the-blank style worksheet, essentially, kind of a Mad Libs thing where we said, I'd rather be in, and they just filled out the name of the place that they'd rather be, and then they uploaded a photo. And then the next week, we changed the prompt to go to blank for what? And again, the user just fills in the name of the place, uploads a photo. And even though it was a pretty mundane set of prompts, the content that was created in response to this was at sometimes actually pretty emotionally poignant, right? So somebody posted about Guangzhou and somebody posted about Tanzania, but they're not just posting about the place, they're uploading these family photos or a study abroad photo and really telling a little bit of a story with that. So that worked quite well. But of course, we didn't want them to just post once. We wanted them to keep coming back to post multiple times to really make this a big service. So after you posted, we said, nice post, now spread the love and heart somebody else's. And we showed you this grid of other people's photos, right? Because we can use those early rules to get you to create the first piece of content, but that's not all we want. We want you to keep coming back and keep creating more and more content. And what that requires is that we create this sort of virtuous feedback loop where you're getting response from other users, you're getting their affection, you're being petted by them, and that makes you feel good, and it makes you feel like you want to come back and do more. So if you notice this little deer, which is a little bit obscured at the bottom of the screen, we said, like one post. So about 80% of people, you say, do this, and if it's simple enough, they're going to do it. So they clicked it, and then this happened. This little tree started to grow from the bottom of the screen. And it was really sort of far enough away from the center, and it was small enough that people weren't necessarily explicitly conscious of it, but it activated their peripheral vision. They said, did that just happen because I hearted this photo? Well, let me heart another one to see. And then when they did that, it grew a little bit more. And so now they're pretty sure that this tree is growing in response to them clicking the heart button on all these posts. And they just keep clicking it, and it keeps growing. And what doing this provided for our service is it raised the average number of likes that was being created about 4 times. And in aggregate, we had 7 times more likes in the system and 10 times more posts than would have been predicted without doing some of these recommendations, right? So this is actually just a sort of less obvious version of a progress bar combined with giving people candy, right? So it's a nice little surprise that they get for taking this action, but it's also showing progress because it's getting bigger, but it makes them feel good and sort of surprising, and it's kind of quirky. So what we do with Wander is try to figure out how to apply these rules in sort of more innovative and interesting ways. And so thanks for listening. Those were 8 rules for engagement. And now I think Catherine has the first question.
So my question is that I do remember that you mentioned a lot of different social platforms, Tumblr, Foursquare, LinkedIn, but you deliberately miss out Facebook, and all the people is wondering the future of it. Do you think it concludes the different 8 principles on that platforms, or if there's any comparison, the hottest Chinese microblog, Xinlang Weibo, your own opinion? Thank you.
Sure. So, well, Facebook's starting to pursue a little bit of an M&A strategy, which I think is quite wise for them. There was an announcement today that they might acquire WhatsApp, and I was talking to some people this morning. And how many people here use WhatsApp? That's really amazing because in the US, very, very few adults use WhatsApp. It's almost all teenagers. So you're in very good company here. And that was sort of really surprising to me, but it turns out Facebook might acquire them, or that at least that's the rumor. So I think Facebook's going to continue to get growth through acquiring companies like Instagram, which potentially is not as popular here for whatever reason, and also things like WhatsApp, et cetera. I think what Facebook did at the beginning is Facebook sort of started out with something that always works, which is flirting and sex. And I don't know how many people were on Facebook in the early days, or if you're familiar with where the name of the service comes from, but at least where I went to university, they used to give out a paper Facebook, and essentially this had a photograph of all of the incoming students, and all the upper class guys and all the upper class girls would look forward to the beginning of school when you'd get given this book which had all the photos of the new students who are going to be joining you next year, and everybody's going through and kind of circling on them which ones they think are the cutest people. And so if you build a service around that, you can abandon all other rules, because just human nature, we love to just look at pictures of attractive people and go through that. But I think one thing that they did, which was really effective, is this if this then that thing. They connected it to on top of a real world behavior that was very pervasive. So everybody was already into using a paper Facebook, and so they just digitized that format. And then over time added more and more functionality. But at the beginning, you couldn't really create content. They did some of the stuff like leveraging the need to complete. They showed you this profile, and you wanted to fill out your profile, and people were competing against each other, at least subconsciously, because you wanted your profile to look better than other people. So when they gave you the ability to upload more photos, well, you don't just want to put 1, you want to put 5, because you want to show that it wasn't just a lucky shot of you, that you actually do look just that good. Anybody else?
Another 8 rule for not how to engage people.
Could you say that again?
Well, you are saying out of 8 rules how successful you engage people. But as a designer, maybe, or going to design something, what to avoid? What is the worst thing you can disengage people? By coding success is easy, right? Yeah. What about coding failures?
Sure. So I think the biggest mistake that most designers make, or most people who are building these services, is having the if you build this, they will come attitude. And that as soon as you get rid of that attitude, you start thinking about these rules or rules that you come up with on your own. But I think the key thing is that you don't assume that just because you do a good job of designing it, even if you designed it around something that you're pretty sure people want to do, it can't be a foregone conclusion for you that people are just going to use it. You have to be thinking about distribution, how people are going to engage with it, what your viral loop is, and all those concepts. And so when I am mentoring entrepreneurs or giving talks in the States, and people ask me, people who are thinking about starting companies or they're designing websites ask me questions, that's the number one thing I always say that you have to avoid. And it's really important. And almost everybody who gets into this at the beginning just says, no. That might be true for other people, but they're not as good of a designer as I am. I'm going to do it better than they are. It doesn't matter that people haven't come to these things in the past. I'm just going to do a better job. And I think there's plenty of examples where inarguably better products have failed. You look at Betamax or HD DVD. In both cases, probably better products, but didn't succeed in the long run because they didn't have as good distribution. At the end of the day, they didn't form the right partnerships. So sometimes you can do that through partnerships. These days, more often, you do it through the actual design of the service, because these are social products. These are products that are consumed in a group of people that have network effects, and so the value of them is not absolute. It's dependent on how many other people have it. And I guess at the end of the day, the product of DVDs or anything else like that is also, to some extent, network effects driven, because if you are the only one who has this kind of media player, then where are you going to get the new videos to watch for it, right? So a lot of people have to have this in order for the distribution channels to arise to take advantage of that.
Now we're getting somewhere.
You've been talking a lot about building the website after you talk to the clients and talk to the potential group of people. And even the first speaker said that as well. So according to Lean Startup, it says that you have to build the minimum viable product. And are you saying that is building the website the minimum viable product, or because usually when you get funding, you need a prototype, a minimum viable product to get funding from people. Does that come, do you mean the prototype comes before asking the clients or after?
Sure, so that's a great question. I think, well, first of all, I'll start by saying that I don't completely buy the Lean Startup dogma. I think some principles of it are useful, but I think a lot of people have interpreted it to mean that you can build crappy products, and that's not only a possibility, but that's for some reason advantageous, and I don't think that that's the case. The other thing is that this concept of minimum viable product ends up not really being that instructive, because it turns out to be really, really hard to figure out what is minimally viable for the product that you're trying to build. And really what that means is that you come up with some hypothesis, and then you, in the fastest amount of time and for the least amount of money, build or design something that tests that hypothesis. And so what is minimally viable is going to vary completely depending on what product you're building. A lot of times it's a sort of phased approach. So you don't just design one minimally viable product. You might do 20 or 30 MVP products to get to a completed web service. So maybe your first MVP was a survey that you built using Wufoo forms or Google Docs and that you just emailed to people. Or maybe you spent $20 on AdWords and put up a splash page, or you went to a coffee shop with a sign and said, I'll give you free coffee if you answer these 5 questions. That might be your first MVP. But these are really assuming that you have an MVP. If you don't follow some of these rules, or if you just assume that because you've gotten good data or good responses from your MVP, that you don't have to think about distribution, that's really what I'm talking about. So all of this is assuming that at the end of the day, you've built a service that people want to use, because no amount of, if you've built a service that people don't want, this is just kind of lipstick on a pig, and it's not going to, it might work in the short term, but it won't create lasting engagement. So you do have to have something that people fundamentally want, especially for crowdsourcing. It seems evident. There's enough of these out there that people do genuinely want them. So with that assumed, we've answered that part of the MVP. We've tested the hypothesis that people want it. Now how do we build something that people are going to actually use? Because people don't use all sorts of products that they tell you they're going to love or they tell you that they want. I think that's also important to think about, is that most of the people who've done failed products or products that failed did some MVP stuff as well, and they still failed. So that was a big part of what Nicholas talked about, is that he took all this lean startup methodology and then it still failed. So you can test these hypotheses and they can work, but that doesn't mean the service is going to work. You have to do additional things.
So thank you so much, Jeremy.